Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the strangest or most unexplainable thing you've seen a person do when they were close to death? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I work in pre-hospital emergency care, and one day I went to this elderly woman in a nursing home. The reason we were called was because the staff thought she was having seizures. When I walked into her room, I was greeted with a lovely woman sat upright in her chair looking very well. Throughout my assessment, she was laughing and joking with me, and her observations came back normal. She asked for a cup of tea and sent her daughter out of the room to get it, and then she turned to me. I was sat beside her, and she said, "Remember, I have a DNAR," and I reassured her that I had seen it. She then leaned over to me and tapped me gently on my hand and said, "Well, whatever you do, dear, don't bring me back," and proceeded to die. It was like she had her finger on the off switch and decided to flick it. I've never seen a person go so calmly into death. I worked hospice for a while. One of my patients was completely removed mentally and had been nonverbal for about 4 months. The night he passed, he looked at his wife and began to sing their wedding song. I believe it to be terminal lucidity. He looked at her while singing, and with tears in his eyes, he said that he always loved her. He then closed his eyes and passed away as his wife finished the song. Changed my life. Wow. One of my ex's grandfathers, who was in good health, woke up one day and asked his son to take him to Mass. They went to Mass, he did confession, and received a blessing. And on the way home, he put his head on his son's shoulder as his son was driving, said his deceased wife's name, and passed away. We all assumed he knew this was his last day. Not a bad way to go. Not hospice, but my uncle's last moments. He was sat in his bed with the afternoon sun shining in, and his daughter was having a chat to him, as well as his sister on the bay window seat, and his cat was in his lap, and he sighed deeply and said, "Well, as lovely as all this is, I'm afraid I must go." And he rested his head back on the pillow and was gone. My mom died of COPD. She was in the ICU, hooked up to a ventilator, in and out of consciousness, and on very heavy pain medication. She was strapped to the bed at one point because she kept trying to pull her IVs and tubes out. I was in the room with my sister and aunt, her sister, and we were talking about my dad. My mom stirred a bit, came to for a moment, and with what little she had, lifted her middle finger in the air. It was no secret that they didn't like each other, but this one little thing made everyone laugh, and it's still something I think back on over a decade later. I worked as a CNA at a nursing home while I was in college. Strangest thing I experienced was a healthy elderly client asking what time her daughter was scheduled to visit. I told her 4:30, and she asked me to call her daughter because she was going home at 3:53. It was strange because the time was so specific, and as I said she was healthy, no reason to suspect she would die. I did as I was asked, and her daughter showed up. The woman had a heart attack with her daughter in the room. Her official time of death was 3:55. As everyone knows, it takes a couple minutes for the doctor to pronounce a patient dead. My grandfather was dying in a nursing home. A lot of patients were roaming the building as we were waiting for him to pass. My grandfather was an asshole, just not a great person. When he was taking his last breath, we heard a patient right outside the door say, "Ah, damn it, get away from me." And we assumed his soul hopped off her on his way out, as the patient didn't normally speak that way. I'm not in the medical field, but my grandpa flew to see his sister after she had a terrible accident in a nursing home and wasn't expected to recover. My uncle and aunt took him to say his final goodbye, and they heard him say he would see her again soon. When they returned home, we were all waiting for the call that she had passed. The call that came was that my grandpa had gotten home from the airport, thanked my aunt and uncle for taking him, and had gone to his room to lay down for a nap. He passed in his sleep and was found by his daughter when she biked to his house to chat about his visit. I'll never forget my dad, his son, answering the phone and saying he was gone. My dad hung up the phone and it rang again. This time it was his cousin calling to say my grandpa's sister had passed. As far as we could figure out, they died within a few hours of each other. Not a doctor or nurse. One of my uncles had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was a tough guy and didn't trust hospitals, so he didn't see a doctor until it was way too late, despite being in debilitating pain. When he did, the prognosis was grim. He had maybe 6 weeks left, and pancreatic cancer is a painful way to die. He decided to get MAID instead, medical assistance in dying, which is legal in Canada. On the day we were all gathered around his bed, all the paperwork and permissions were sorted out, and the syringe of drugs was connected to his IV. He was heavily sedated, but he has to be the one to push the plunger, which he did with the help of his wife. He closed his eyes, and his breathing got very shallow and slowed down. After a few minutes, we thought he had passed. We were all standing around him, some saying goodbye. A lot of people were crying. About 10 minutes passed, and people started to leave when suddenly, in a strong, clear voice, he said, "Russell, wait for me." He weakly raised his hand, and then his breath rattled once, and he was gone. Nobody knew who Russell was, and it was kind of a mystery we talked about from time to time at family gatherings, trying to guess who he was. Years later, his wife passed, and when his kids were going through the things, they found a very old photograph of him when he was maybe 5 years old. He was in a sandbox with a small dog. On the back of the picture, in faded ink, it read, "Russell, 1944. The thought that our pets that have gone before us meet us to help us cross over fills me with comfort. I hope it isn't just a mind trying to make sense of a crazy time. I hope my Casey and Finnegan are waiting for me." I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but this was a particularly tough read. Beautiful and still very sad. I am not immune to the emotion when you talk about the passing of a child or a loving son or daughter to a mother. It's a part of life that we all will go through, and it's inevitable. And the longer we live, the higher the probability is we'll lose someone we love very much. And I think it's a good reminder to love the people that love you while we can. I don't work at a hospital, but was in there with my dad while he was passing. He had a stroke and died 5 days later. On day 3 to 5, he kept reaching up and trying to grab something or someone. I snapped a few photos, and mumbling, "Mom, Mom," he kept crying as well. The minute before passing, he would stop breathing, then gasp so loudly every time he did it, I would literally jump. My first wife died at 33. I spent every moment with her for the last 5 days of her life. She was on morphine and pretty out of it, but right before she went, her eyes shot open, and she looked right in my eyes. I leaned in and whispered, "It's okay. I would take care of our 2 kids. We'll be fine." I told her I loved her and would see her on the other side. She nodded ever so slightly and smiled and passed away at that moment. I worked as a clerk on the otolaryngology unit for months when I was in college. For some reason, when people were about to die, many of them, even if they hadn't been mobile in some time, would get up and walk the hallways as if they were trying to get away. The first time it happened, a woman who had been nonverbal for days and hadn't eaten in that time came walking up to me at the desk in the middle of the night and asked me where would be a good place to get a burger in town. It was very weird. This is a weird one to me. My father-in-law was home hospice. All the family were around him, about 15 people crammed in the bedroom. My husband was playing the guitar, all his father's favorite songs. I noticed my youngest, about 8, just staring above father-in-law's head. Father-in-law didn't pass until the next morning, but when I asked my son what he was looking at, He said 2 really tall angels standing on either side of Pappy. He said the angels didn't look at anyone else but him. He said they were waiting for him. When I've asked him about it after, he doesn't remember anything about it. I was about 6 or 7 when my grandma died. She had just come back from a cruise to Aruba, got sick, and had to be put into the hospital. My dad took me to see her most nights, but on this particular night I was really sick with a stomach bug, high fever, vomiting, etc. My parents were divorced, so he called my mom to come over and sit with me while he went to the hospital. I was so sick that even the smell of my mom's shampoo made me vomit. My mom put me to bed early and went downstairs. Sometime later I woke up to see my grandma at the foot of my bed telling me that everything was okay and not to be sad. I didn't think too much of it at the time. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little better. My dad tells me that my grandma died the night before. I worked night shift at an inpatient unit. A lady died the night before. She had been on the unit for a while. Family had photos of her dressed up placed around the room. She was a singer, and some of the photos were of her wearing a black dress with a big black hat. The new patient that was admitted to that room during the day wasn't able to sleep at night during my shift. I asked her if anything was wrong. She said a lady in a long black dress and a big black hat kept singing, and it was keeping her awake. That was about 20 years ago, and it still gives me chills. Not a hospice hospital worker, but I did 30 years as a first responder. I have no idea how many folks died with me, as I tried to offer peace and comfort for real. I have no idea. Young men clutching my hand after shootings, the countless people on their last breaths after auto accidents. I can't even begin to account for them all. But here's the deal. You get pretty emotionally immune to watching folks die. You just do. But to this day, I can recall the names and faces of every child that died in my arms. It's a goddamn nightmare. And please note, I'm not religious. I'm not a warm guy. I'm in my 50s and still don't have children of my own, but holy shit, the innocent kids still haunt me. My last month of work, we get an innocuous call of a child that fell down in a parking lot. It was 200 yards away from our station. A car was flying around too fast in the parking lot and clipped her. I arrived on foot, and a sweet 10-year-old girl was crying as she lay in the street. I got down and held her hand. She was in tears and excruciating pain. She looked in my eyes and told me, "I'm scared because I'm dying." I held her right hand and promised her that she'd be all right. She was so scared. Within 10 or so minutes, we finally got an ambulance to rush her to the ER. She died later that evening. And all the fucking shootings, stabbings, overdoses, and homicides. And they mean almost nothing to me. But all these years later, and I still see that little girl's face in my dreams. She was in so much pain. She was so scared. And now, I'm checking back out. This life was never supposed to be easy, I get it, I do. But if there's a God, he's got a lot of apologizing to do. During a night shift, we had a very sick gentleman with extensive stage 4 lung cancer, not for any MET calls or CPR, but for end-of-life care if he deteriorated further, and was in a really bad way. Early-ish in the night, we attended to him after we heard him faintly calling out, "Help me, help me." Gave him some morphine, too, because he was clearly uncomfortable. We checked him again 1 hour later, still breathing, looking relaxed, resting in bed. The second hourly check, I come back and I find his bed is raised to its maximum height, and he has passed, looking deathly gray and is no longer breathing. My colleague is equally surprised at the bed situation because he hadn't touched it. We both figured perhaps in a delirium the patient had messed around with his bed controller, perhaps trying to signal for help or something, mistaking it for a nursing call bell. After the doctor finally certifies the death and contacts the family, we move the patient out of his room and into our treatment room so we can prep him for the morgue and place him into a body bag. My colleague and I had lowered the bed and put it at a safe height for our backs so we could roll and clean him safely. I shit you not, the moment we had finished wrapping him and had stepped back, the bed starts making a whirring noise and starts rising up again. I can see my colleague's hands, and he can see mine, and neither of us have our hands anywhere near the bed controller. We both just shot at each other a "what the" look. Most likely just a problem with the bed's electrics, but to have it happen, particularly after we had finished and not just during the procedure, was a real X-Files moment for me. Not in the medical field, but my mom was in palliative care with cancer. She had a lot of anxiety surrounding dying and rarely addressed it head-on, but one day in late April as I sat beside her bed in the hospital, she told me she thought that she was going to die that day. I was at a loss for words when she suddenly asked me the date, and I told her April 28th. She remarked how it was her estranged daughter's, my estranged older sister's, birthday, and that it wouldn't be very nice for my sister to have to share her birthday with her, my mom's, death day. She didn't mention anything more about it, about dying on any specific day. She passed away 1 month later on May 28th, and in typing this, I realized that today is also my sister's birthday. Strange. Hospice nurse for a few years. Multiple times I've had patients tell me they hear bells before they pass. I'm talking 4 or 5 times in 2 years. The final one seemed like he could probably stick around for a while. He told me he heard the wedding bells, that they sounded beautiful, and he was excited. He passed that night. I've had patients get uncharacteristically clear-headed hours before they die and thank me for being kind. It was not a rally. They didn't get a bunch of energy or seem any healthier, just unexpected displays of gratitude right before passing. I'm going to preface these last 2 with, I don't believe in the paranormal, I just genuinely can't explain this, or maybe I don't want to think about it enough to find a reason. I had a patient pass while I was in the room. She wasn't my favorite patient. Honestly, she was pretty hostile, and me and her never really developed a rapport. I pulled her lines, shut her eyes, put her body in a more comfortable position. I usually say something small when I'm done, like hers was maybe, I hope you were comfortable. I hope the transition is easy. I shit you not. The light above her head turned off, maybe 5 seconds or so. Then the light in the middle of the room turned off, similar amount of time. But the light above her head had turned back on. Then both of these lights were on, but the light above the door turned off. I was new and pale. I just can't really explain what that would ever be. Had another lady jerk up in bed, and when my back was turned, had a CNA in the room with me. She looked at us and started speaking in a deep voice, like a voice I wouldn't expect a granny to even be able to speak in. Said some weird bullshit like, "You think you can just do whatever you want?" and started laughing. I whipped around and the CNA about had a panic attack. The old lady just started talking normally again. I asked if that was her, and she just gave a light laugh. She was fine the rest of the night, super sweet, past the next morning. There's probably an explanation for the last 2, but it's still just creepy as hell, man.